Welcome to the Sacred Significance Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Veronica Cochran. So if you were with me for the last episode, we really started down the track of the habit of being you. And if you remember, we talked about how you could be synonymous with the word habit, right? Because we're so used to habit being used to describe something we do, conscious or unconscious. So I wanted you to stop and consider that maybe, just maybe, over time you've developed a way of being that is more habitual. It's more based on expectations of you. It's based on role-centric behaviors, right? Doctor, nurse, whatever that is. And I wanted you to really stop and think about if your true sense of identity is based in some sort of performance-centric measure, right? Where you're doing what you believe is expected of you. You're behaving out of some sense of ideal, right? Around, I must do this, I have to be this, those kind of things. So we just got started, and where I want to finish today, I want to continue with the same vein, the habit of being you, part 2, this to be separate. And I want to dig straight into more of this content, hoping to extract and unveil for you more of the difference between the you he knew and the you that you think yourself to be. So don't miss this episode. Are you ready? Let's go. Okay, so if you have your pencil and paper, you should have some notes on there relative to the definition of self-realization, that it's just at the heart of everything. It just simply means knowing yourself with such a level of knowing that it changes how you live, right? How you show up, how you contribute. That level of self-knowing is very different than self-knowledge, and we'll talk more about that. So the habit of being you, part 2, is where we are today, but I wanted to start by going just back enough to ground us in the same space so that we can all come forward together. So habit, again, the habit of being you simply is talking about the ways in which we behave that are somewhat based on just replication, right? It's familiar. It's my way of thinking. It's my way of behaving. It's my way of feeling. When I get angry, I go shopping, right? There's just this pattern of behaviors, which is typically why, right, Monday always looks and feels like Monday, right? Because there's a habit of me on a Monday. I do different things on Monday than I do on Friday. Friday, the habit of being me might look and feel very different, but nonetheless, it's another pattern, what? Steeped in performance. We talked about the danger of having an identity that is performance-based. The danger of that, right? There's so many dangers, but one of them is that it's a moving target, right? So that you're never quite there, right? You're doing good, but maybe not good enough. You're doing okay, but you could be doing better. Right? That was good, but let's see if you can do this. So the danger of having a performance-based identity is it makes you extremely vulnerable, right, to some level of continuous need to be something different, be another version, do something better. So the danger of that is it creates this instability in who we are fundamentally, right? And as a result, we feel very weakened, right? Whenever we're not performing high, we might feel somewhat substandard. We might feel somewhat deficient. We might feel inadequate. We might really struggle with, not feeling like we're doing enough or not feeling like we're meeting the mark, right? That creates such vulnerability. Think of it this way. If you've ever known somebody to retire, and then when they retire from a job, they literally just seem to tumble downhill physically, and then mentally, and then eventually maybe they're no longer with us. Why is that? Because so much of who they believe themselves to be is steeped in, right, what they do, right? It's based on how they see themselves is based on their ability to perform. And when they're not able to perform, it creates a huge sense of vulnerability and a sense of self dissatisfaction, right? And we see that all the time in different ways. So the habit of being you is meant to kind of put you back in front of the mirror so that you can really begin to see where you might have developed this kind of sense of this is who I am, and I perform out of this idea, much like a play, right? Like a performer or a character in a play. We learn to take on the persona of the narrative. We learn to become what they're expecting. We learn to rise to the occasion and prove, confirm, affirm that what they believe about us, especially if it's good, it is true. Or maybe we're working to disprove theories, right? But either way, we are performing. And we talked about how utterly exhausting that is for us to keep coming to the table attempting to be another version. So where did the pattern come from, right? So remember we talked about most of us are educated about who we are by other people. There's a very small percentage of people on the planet that actually live by a direct sense of self-knowing. Most of us have been taught or told who we are directly or indirectly. And so what that means is maybe sometimes it's been an authority figure, somebody that their words had tremendous weight. And when they said, you are not smart, or you're not as smart as your sister, or why can't you be like your brother, or whatever it is, like those messages, were like embossed in us in some way. And as a result, it shaped how we see or how we saw ourselves. So sometimes it's authority, sometimes it's consensus. Enough people say the same thing about you, and so it must be true, right? Majority rules. So it must be true if I have a group, they've said it, and then they've said it, and then they've said it. And so sometimes consensus becomes a very strong some sort of affirmation that, oh, well, I must be this because they have said it, and whoever the proverbial they is has that kind of power. So sometimes it's consensus. Sometimes it's experience, right? You go through a thing enough that it educates you about you, right? So let's say you're going through school and you have a couple of times where you don't really test well. And other people, around you are like, oh my gosh, look at my A. Oh, look, I got a B plus, right? And your test scores don't bear that out. So maybe you got a C, maybe you didn't do as well as a C, whatever it is. But through this experience of comparison, we begin to internalize messages that they got an A, they got a B, I got a C. So what does that mean? I'm not smart, right? And so literally comparison is one of the most powerful ways we internalize messages that no one is saying. Right? Sometimes it's just the comparison itself that speaks to us, and we shape ourselves in response to that comparison. You have a sibling that plays an instrument and they play really, really well, and maybe you were taking lessons on the same instrument and you don't play as well, so the sibling that plays well gets all the attention. So sometimes that attention going to someone else, right? The lack of recognition still speaks to me, right? It still affirms that I might not be enough in that category, or I may not be good enough in that category. So attention, recognition for other people tends to have very interesting messages back to us, right? Because remember, at the core of our world is kind of the you that is forming, right? So everything is somewhat dialed into you in some way. Even if it's not about you, we make it about us. And as a result, you conceive through conditioning, consensus, through comparisons, and all these other ways of messaging that you and I have shaped an idea, good, bad, or indifferent, about who we believe we are, okay? Now, for most people, this idea literally has something to do with what we do, not who we are. Now, how do we know that? Because when people ask you, like, tell me a little bit about yourself, what's the first thing we do? We tell them what we do. Tell me a little bit about, what's something I wouldn't know about you, right? Well, I like to skateboard, or whatever it is. Like, it's always a doer, or like a thing. I like art, I like to draw, or, but it's very seldom something that is not something they would visibly see us doing, right? Because normally we self-identify by what we do. So if I were going to have you draw a diagram, and I'll probably ask you to do this, it's pretty simple. I want you to write the word, maybe do, on a sheet of paper, and I want you to make an arrow going to the right, and I want you to write the word be, right? So to the left, you should have the word do, you should have an arrow, and to the right, you should have the word be. Now, the problem with this particular scenario is normally this is how we kind of devise, right? And this is how we kind of rotate through life. So because I identify with what I do informs who I am. right? So I am a nurse or I am a doctor because what? I nurse for the day, or I've gone to med school or whatever it is. So doing typically informs me of who I am, right? Whether it's I've been really good at school, I'm great at math, and so then I am good at math, I am great in school. So literally the I am statements come off of the doing. Now the danger of that means that the doing must inform me of who I am. Well, how dangerous is that, right? Because if my environment must confirm or affirm who I am, that's going to put me in a pretty vulnerable position. Just think about that. Which is why most people, when they lose a job, it's very difficult, isn't it? Because who they believe they are is steeped in the doing of that job, even if they don't like it. So much so that if they go get another job, are they looking for the same job? Most likely. Why? Because that's how they self-identify. Not that they can't do something else. Not that you couldn't go across the street and get another job doing something totally different. But we don't think that way because most of us, our identity is grounded in a particular behavioral sweet spot or behavioral mix of skills and abilities. So doing informs my sense of self. Now, I already told you that's dangerous, but that's pretty much how most of us live our lives. Tell me about yourself, I tell you what I do. Because what I do tells me who I am. The part of that that's also staggeringly, maybe in many ways self-sabotaging, is my degree of confidence is going to be equivalent to how well I do, right? So my doing, how well I'm doing, is going to be proportional to how good I feel about myself, how confident I am, how much self-belief I have. If I'm not doing well, I'm not going to feel very confident, and I'm not going to have a lot of self-belief. So that means that I have to be chasing, like a dog chasing its tail. I have to be doing a lot to feel good. I have to be doing well, right, to feel confident and have self-belief. That's also a dangerous place to be. Why? Because it's maybe more like an insatiable appetite. It's kind of like an appetite you can't ever settle. You can't ever please. You can't ever appease. Think about it. If I have to continuously be doing something, right, in an effort to feel good about myself, to feel confident about myself, well, eventually I'm going to top out on that, and I'm going to need to do something bigger, something better to feel good about myself or better about myself. So it's proportional. Confidence and self-belief are proportional to how well I'm doing. Okay, so you get an evaluation on a job and you tell me if that evaluation is good, woo, we have confidence in what we do, we're moving forward, we have self-belief, we can do our job. But if that evaluation isn't so good, then it does encroach upon our self-confidence and it affects our self-belief, right? Now listen, that had nothing to do with who you are. That had everything to do with how they assessed you. So the other thing that I think is a problem with the doing to being standard, which most of us live our life by, is in that way, not only does it create a great sense of vulnerability, not only is it a place where I cannot ever appease because I'm always going to have to do more, not only is it a place that's proportional, like draw my confidence and self-belief directly from how well I'm doing, not only does the world have to answer, right, confirm and affirm through this doing that I am who I say I am, right? But just imagine how shaky that makes me. Just imagine how vulnerable I am to the whims and the changes that life may throw at me, right? So if by some issue, not of my own, that I can't do the thing anymore, then what happens to my sense of self? What happens to my self-belief? What happens to my self-idea? So self-realization is about eliminating the opportunity to self-sabotage, eliminating the opportunity to find ourselves somehow not rooting for ourselves from the inside out. So when I think about this doing to being conversation, now I want you to flip it around. What would happen if being informed doing? If I had such a strong sense of who I was, if I knew, right, I knew the divine essence, the divine nature from which I am created. I knew that I'm made in the image and likeness of God. I knew exactly who I am, the essence of me, the divine origin, the sacred nature I possess. I understood my significance. If I operated from that as a being, if that was the priority, then imagine how different doing would be. Because doing should be a beautiful bloom, right, of being. Doing should be just an effortless bloom of knowing who I am. Remember, I said this once before. I said, once you answer the question of who you are, you actually answer the question of why you are. Most of the world is searching for the why without knowing the who. So we kind of get it backwards. And as a result, we do a lot of things hoping to find purpose. But really, purpose isn't to be found because according to the scripture, you are purpose. Everything that is here is purpose. It's not looking for a purpose. You are a purpose. So if you think about this, and I just want you to stop and consider, when being is prioritized and you have a true sense of self-realization, you know exactly who you are. Not only does it create great confidence without being dependent on people's expectations, ideas, not only does it create a beautiful sense of validation that doesn't come from having to do things, right? Because that's one of the problems with doing to being is I only feel valid as long as I'm doing. But if we flip it around so that we understand the sacred drives the significant, the sacred is the root, the significant is the fruit. If we understood that, we would never be vulnerable to the validations that we crave from outside sources, right? Whether it's status, recognition, achievement, right? Somebody else to approve of me. I want you to really consider this piece because there isn't anybody on the planet that doesn't want to feel valuable. There isn't anybody that doesn't want to do significant things, to find a way to contribute in a way that's meaningful while they're here. But I want you to understand that it doesn't come because we drive doing into being and we let our experience tell me who I am. But once I know who I am, when being comes first, then it shapes the experience. Listen to the difference. I don't want your experience to quantify you, to confirm who you are, or to affirm this is what I am because look at what happened. I want you to learn that once you know who you are, you begin shaping experiences in a very different way that just is almost effortless by alignment. It's a very different way than we're used to behaving, right? Because for so long, I lived in the first part of this equation. I lived from the doing to being fountain, right? So I did a lot of things. Like I was driven to accomplish a lot of things. I remember my mom said, "Oh my gosh, you're addicted to work." And I said, "No, ma'am, I'm addicted to achievement," right? What a terrible but truthful thing to say. So when you really begin to see that that's a game you can't win. That's a ride that doesn't stop. That's a treadmill you don't want to be on, right? Where everything you are doing is in some way to identify, to allow you to stand up under the conditions you've established for yourself. Allow, in some way for you to confirm and prove that this is who you are. So you have to do all of these things. The theatrics are endless. But once we come to a place of self-realization, where the work and the drive and this performance centricity stops and we understand the value of who we are, not because of what we do, but just the value of who we are because of just our being, that changes everything. So the first thing I can tell you for free that comes from that is it's the first place authenticity arises. It's hard to be authentic in the wrong suit. It's hard to be authentic if we don't really know who we are. It's hard to be authentic as an imposter, right? So if you go back to the story of Jacob, he could have never been authentic, not in the skin of Esau. But I want you to consider that in all the performance, no matter how great the performance, no matter how great the applause from the performance, we can never be authentic in any other suit than the self suit, our true self, the essence of who and what we really are. There's no other way to be authentic. I don't care how they define it. I don't care if they mean it just feel good in my skin. I feel good about who I am. No. Authenticity is the measure of presence. But it's not just the measure of presence, it's the measure of a known presence. Like I know who I am. So I'm not present as in out here climatizing, but I'm present in here. I know exactly who I am. And there's a big difference. So while the world uses authenticity, I'd like to suggest many are not. I'd like to suggest that authenticity cannot arise if we don't know who we are. Because the knowing must be the bedrock for this idea of this bloom of presence where we become fully present in who we are and we live from the inside out. And as a result, that being drives the doing. So we get authenticity, number one. I would like to think that authenticity is the bedrock of true confidence. Do you know why? Because I define self-confidence as the absence of self-judgment. Now think about what I'm saying. Self-confidence is merely the absence of judgment. But do you know all of our stories and narratives from our past and our history, just like Jacob when they said, well, who are you? And we recount all of our story. It's always through the lens of judgment. It's always through the lens of judgment. I should have done this. I had a chance to do that. I should have went to school. Like, it's always through the lens of judgment. Only when we see ourselves clearly, only when we realize exactly who we are, there is no judgment. You know why there's no judgment? Because the true you, the real you, the you he knew, Jeremiah 1:5, the you he knew was not dependent upon an experience to be. Didn't need an experience to qualify him. Was never defined by anything outside of him. Experience, past, history, nothing defined Jacob. Nothing defined Esau. Nothing, according to Jeremiah 1:5, defines you. So we have to begin to understand, when we really go back to what the book says, the you he knew, there is no judgment for, because that you predates any experience you've had. And only by experience do you come to judgment. So just imagine authenticity, to feel authentic and not walk in self-judgment, to feel authentic and sit in the presence of yourself, knowing who you are. That's when we can make the greatest, most significant contribution. Not planned contributions, but when we can really sit in a true sense and state of knowing. And in this moment, I am clear about what is here, and then I can do something about what's out here. So we talked about in the last episode what you are not, right? So if we draw from the same storyline and we still grab Jacob, and we remember he had this other life-changing moment, a moment of self-realization where the angel says, by the way, you're not Jacob, you're Israel. I want you for a few minutes to consider if we could tease apart your experience, right? If you were not defined by whatever that was, past, mistake, flaw, wish I hadn't, wish I wasn't there, like whatever, if you could tease apart the two, because that's exactly what the angel does, which is what I'm wanting to do with you in these episodes, is tease apart how you've defined yourself by what you've done, or define yourself by where you've been, or define yourself by what they said, or define yourself by public opinion. I want you, if you haven't done exercise 1, what you are not, this is exercise 2, I want you to begin just as the angel commanded. If you really sit with yourself and separate yourself from your experience, what then would you say of you? What would you say of you? What would you know of you if it couldn't be drawn from experience, something that you did or a place you'd been or something someone had said? Who would you be then? That's the question on the table. Listen, this has been amazing to join you today. You won't want to miss the next episode. We're going to be talking about what actually constitutes a self-image. What are the pillars that stand it up? Why is it so essential that you and I come to a clear self-realization, a clear self-knowing that's direct, not indirect from other people, but direct from the source within. Listen, it's been a pleasure to be with you. You won't want to miss the next episode. This has been Dr. Veronica with Sacred Significance. I will see you next time.